All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I have Jim Gilkey joining us today, and we're going to be talking about learning programs. Jim Gilkey, PhD, is the author of M-Pact Learning, the new competitive advantage, what all executives need to know. He is the president of S4 NetQuest and a nationally recognized expert in instructional design and learning strategies with an extensive experience in leading the design, development, and implementation of innovative, highly effective learning solutions. And I think that this is an area where, to me, it's so important, right? Anyway, Jim Gilkey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today, Bert. I appreciate it.
You bet, you bet. So I want to jump into this real quick and kind of maybe, how did you get here? How did you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to the point where you're designing learning solutions? Talk about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bert. It's kind of a zigzag journey. My undergrad degree at Ohio State was in aviation. So I came out of Ohio State with a commercial pilot's license and did some training at United Airlines on the 767, which was a blast. But I determined that is not what I wanted to do for a living. So what I ended up doing was coming back, getting my PhD in instructional design and technology at Ohio State, and ended up becoming the assistant director of flight education there. So I ran the flight school as well as the four-year curriculum on campus. Did that for many years, loved that job, loved teaching, loved flying, had always wanted to create my own business. So in 1998, myself, along with two other partners, founded S4 NetQuest.
And so what does S4 NetQuest do?
S4 NetQuest, we're one of the global leaders in learning services. Used to be called training and development, but that has some more traditional connotations. So Bert, it is anything from self-paced micro mods to virtual classroom, performance support tools. And of course, we have an advisory set of services as well: competency modeling, gap analysis, all the end-to-end services you would need from a good learning services firm.
Gotcha. You know what? And I imagine that the online portion is either has exploded or will be exploding, because more and more, it's kind of funny. One of the, I guess, side benefits of this quarantine COVID stuff is that, for years we've talked, when I say we as a society, leaders in general have been talking about online learning. And for the most part, it's definitely a fast-growing environment. One of the fastest-growing industries is this online learning. But I think with COVID, it just made it explode. It went from, I want to say, 30% penetration to like an 80% penetration. It just overnight, everybody was working from home, learning from home. So this is, kind of right up your alley.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you hit that one on the head. And what's funny about that, and hope, we'll talk a little bit about M-Pact Learning methodology. One of the issues companies are facing is exactly what you said, Bert. They need to take their classroom training and make it virtual. The problem is that they're doing what we call a conversion. What I mean by that is, I was a facilitator in a classroom, and so I had PowerPoint slides. So right. What do? I schedule a webinar through WebEx or one of these types of software packages. I put my slides up. Yeah. You may see a video of me lecturing. Very, very ineffective. Millennials hate it. So what companies really need to consider is not converting, but transforming. And what I mean by transforming is creating a learning solution that maximizes that virtual distribution model. And that's a lot different than lecturing to slides.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the whole lecturing with slides is, I think it's been proven it's one of the least effective ways of doing it, because so many people just really, they click and they read the slides, and it's not engaging. And I have worked with some kids that have supposedly ADD and ADHD, and let me tell you, when they're engaged, they're as focused as anybody else. Now, they might be a little bit harder to engage, but I got involved with that because my oldest son was diagnosed with ADD, kind of like his dad was. But when it came to he would get involved like in mystery games, mystery stories, and he would literally sit down and read for hours. And so, it wasn't that he couldn't sit down, is that I think a lot of teachers, they're just not engaged. They're not necessarily paid to be good teachers. They're there to disseminate whatever their curriculum is, and hopefully, I don't know, some of the students will learn, but we know that model is also not as effective as it could be, right?
Again, that is a great point. And the millennials have really driven a change in the way that learning is done nowadays. This lecture format of standing in front of a class and I'm the keeper of the knowledge. I'm going to tell you what this knowledge is. You're going to write that down and spit it back on a test. Very, very, very ineffective.
Right.
And what M-Pact Learning does, as an example, the result of that is application of knowledge, meaning you're actually applying it. You're going to go onto your job and apply it. And by applying it, you're going to help your company obtain a competitive advantage because of what you can do and because of what you know. And the millennials that you talked about, they're driving that. And it's funny because, we do speaking engagements around the country, and people will say, yeah, but the millennials, very short attention span. Really? Have you ever seen one of them sit in front of Fortnite or Facebook? I mean, they could sit there for a long time, probably longer than me. I'm a baby boomer.
Right.
The key is what you said. It must be engaging, right? They're not just going to sit there and listen. They want to do something with it.
They want to do something. Yeah.
They want to do something with it. And what's really critical is they must know at the outset, this is called law of readiness. They must know that it's going to benefit them in some shape or form. They're not just going to sit through stuff because somebody told them to do so.
It's interesting that you say that, the law of readiness right there, everybody, let's write that one down. The law of readiness. To me, that is so impactful, because one of the biggest struggles I had in my high school career was algebra, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And of course, you ask the teacher, give me an example of that, and they can never show you how that is going to be used in the real world. And, and so it literally just kind of put a blind spot in front of me. Just my brain locked up, and I struggled through algebra because they have all these rules and logic sequences, but yet none of the teachers can tell you how that is going to work in the real world. And this idea of this law of readiness, to me, man, that hits me like a friggin' train, because that's the whole point of learning something. Is, for at least for me anyway, is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to learn something, or at least invest my time to hopefully learn something. But I want to be able to apply it immediately, not theoretically 4 or 5 years down the road. I mean, the law of readiness. I love that idea of the law of readiness.
Yeah, you gave a really good example of algebra. And I'm sure, Bert, that a lot of people can relate to what you're saying. I'll give you another great example in the corporate world.
Okay.
You're training sales associates, let's say, and you're in front of this group. And what are they doing? They're looking at their phones. They're wondering when the first break is so that they can make contact, make sure the relationships are there. How's the latest deal going? Well, if you at the beginning of that say, hey, by the way, at the end of this training, you're going to be able to sell 30% more than you could sell right now. Okay, suddenly they're not looking at their phones anymore. Suddenly they're looking at you. Did you say 30% more? Yes. Okay, you have my attention. Now, the critical part there, as you can assume, Bert, is can you actually do that with the
Right.
training? But yeah, it's a great example of law of readiness. If I don't see value in it, even if it's designed really well, if the value is not there for me, it's not going to matter because I'm not
Yeah,
going to be
yeah.
engaged.
I love that. I love that. And I think most people definitely get on board with the law of readiness. And it brings me to this question. How is it that so many, experts, subject matter experts are so bad, for lack of better terms, at designing learning programs and online courses? Talk about this.
Great question. And it's really part of the M-Pact Learning methodology in the book. What you have found, I'm assuming in your career, it's certainly been in mine, even through aviation. What happens is, again, let's use sales. I came on as a sales associate. I got better. They made me manager of the sales group. And then because of my expertise, they made me the head trainer of sales. The problem with that is, although I bring a breadth of subject matter expertise and years of experience to that, which by the way is absolutely critical, what you do not know, or what most subject matter experts do not know, is how people learn. What are the laws of learning? What's the psychology behind it? So what do? They stand in front of a class. Everything they say is on the PowerPoint behind them. And then they ask somebody to take a test at the end of it. Again, because they don't understand these instructional design principles. And I'll tell you where it really, really becomes problematic is when you ask that same subject matter expert, hey, all the stuff you've been doing in the class, we now want you to put that online. We want you to virtualize that. And that's, as we started out the conversation, Bert, that's when, well, okay, I'll take my PowerPoint slides, I'll put them in a WebEx, and I'll have a window where you can see me. And it just gets progressively worse as you get into this virtual area. Yeah.
You know what? And it's so funny too, because there are some teachers, speakers, whatever you want to call it, that are funny and they are engaging, and they ask questions, and they have little jokes, and they might even throw a little joke inside their what do you call it, their PowerPoint slide. And then there are some teachers who are very monotone and very technical, and they sound like a technical book, right? It's, put B into slot A at this angle. And it's just, unless you have the exact same personality, that's not going to work. And we know that everybody, that there's at least 4, maybe more different types of personalities, and definitely a slew of learning methods, right? We all learn differently. Some of us can sit down and just take notes. Some of us have to be more physical. I remember when I was, training to be a speaker and a teacher, the rule of thumb was that the mind can only take what the butt can endure. And that was kind of a reminder to get your people up. They got to stretch. They got to re-engage their bodies, because you sit there for a while and then you tend to slump more and you slump more, and the more you slump, less energy you have, and you become kind of not necessarily mentally depressed, but you become physically depressed, and you got to wake people back up. And now in a lot of the speaking arenas, you'll see people get up and down, because it helps them stay a little bit more focused. So to me, that's very, what do you call it? To me, that makes sense, that you have a guy who, again, might be a subject matter expert, but isn't a learning matter expert, right? Or a teaching expert. And it's vastly different.
Vastly different. And even the example you gave, Bert, which is a good one, some lecturers are very entertaining. They tell good stories. They may ask some questions. So even from that standpoint, they're still facilitating, they're still lecturing, more effective than somebody that's very dry. But when you look at things like impact learning, the impetus shouldn't be on the facilitator. The impetus should be on the learner. So as an example, rather than me lecturing about a topic, give the class a problem to solve. You can work them in groups if you want, give them some information to solve it, then facilitate that. Millennials love it. It's very engaging, actually activates a different part of the brain when you're doing problem solving. So one of the foundations to impact learning is problem-based. And when you mix that with collaboration, it is a very, very powerful approach. And not only is it more engaging, it's also much more effective. And what I mean by that, it's not simple rote memorization of facts that you're going to spit back on a test. It's actually the two highest levels of learning: application and correlation, meaning I can apply it because you taught me how to apply it because I used it to solve problems. And now I can actually correlate that across different situations or scenarios. Major, major difference in gaining a competitive advantage.
I like that. I like that. And again, the book is Impact Learning, the New Competitive Advantage, what all executives need to know. And if you're an executive, whether you're small company or big company, Impact Learning might be a great tool for you to start disseminating your information and really bringing your training to life. It's so vitally important. Most people think that that training has to be this this awe-inspiring curriculum. And what I have found, depending on the company, that there might be 6 or 10 or 12 things that you have to train on kind of on a rotating basis. So maybe this week you're training on, back to your sales analogy, maybe this week you're going to be training on the top 10 objections and rebuttals, and next week you're going to be talking about or training on how to break the ice or things of that nature. Training, and I want your thoughts on this. Training doesn't have to be necessarily a university type model. Whatever fits your business. And to me, I'm a big believer that as a professional, I'm always motivated, or at least I want to get better. And it's not learning, again, it's not like learning 1,000 new different things. It's learning 10 or 12 or whatever those core items are, and really building a foundation on those core items. And I think my whole point to this is I think a lot of people think that learning has to be, or training has to be this, university grade, all-inspiring thing. And they overwhelm themselves before they even start writing the first page.
Again, very valid point. There was a point in time, late 80s, early 90s, where there was the corporate university movement. Let's have our training in a corporation be the same as it is in academics. Didn't pan out. Now, I'm not saying there aren't corporate universities that do a good job, but the concept of a curriculum that I'm trudging through that has a lot of lecture in it is not an effective model. As a matter of fact, you hit on a very good point. In some cases, the learning or the training, if I'm not going to do it for 6 or 8 months, then why are you training me on that now? I'm going to forget it. So one of the concepts we use in impact learning is just-in-time learning. We did some work for McDonald's, and one of the things we were looking at is what can we do within the restaurants? And let's say I'm going to do an interview. Well, I could teach somebody, a manager, how to interview, but what if they don't do that for several months? So part of the impact learning is what we call performance support, just-in-time learning. So I'm going to interview somebody tomorrow, bring up my app, profile the person. It's somebody in the kitchen. I want somebody with experience. It'll pop up how I should prepare. It pops up what questions I should ask, etc. So you're exactly right. This university model of knocking out modules, of going through courses, of completing a curriculum is an outdated model. A lot of what we need to do now, there has to be some of that, especially with onboarding, but there's a number of things we can do with these performance support tools and this just-in-time learning methodology.
Sure, sure. I like that. I like that. Just in time learning. Based on what you've seen, what are some of the biggest issues out there with the way people are, training? What do you see are some of the main elements missing in today's corporate training? Talk about that.
Again, I think it goes back to what we were discussing, Bert. I think it's the fact that subject matter experts are the ones designing and delivering it. Now, in most cases, we'll design it, but we want a subject matter expert to deliver it because of that color they can bring,
right?
Because of the legitimacy they bring, because of the stories they can tell. So again, this traditional methodology of content-based, I'm going to lecture, you're going to write it down. It's traditional. It's not highly effective. So again, problem-based learning, putting the impetus on the learner. Another great example, I'm going to stay with the sales. We do a lot within the medical industry, medical device manufacturers. So we had a virtual session about presenting your product. So instead of the facilitator lecturing, what we did was we split the group into two. We said, Group A, you're going to present your product against a competitor. Group B, you're going to evaluate that. Whoa, 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 whoa. How can Group B evaluate them? They're just learning. Well, we gave them a performance support tool. Here's the categories. Here's what a 1 is. Here's what a 5 is. That problem-based approach, the impetus being on the learners. So B evaluates A, then B presents, and A evaluates B. Now, what am I doing as a facilitator? I'm adding to that evaluation. I'm facilitating those exercises, but I'm certainly not lecturing on how to do that. You're actually applying that and doing it. You would not believe the types of results you can get when you use that type of methodology.
Well, and I want to kind of focus in on something that you said multiple times, and that is facilitate. And I think that to me is a key ingredient. With M-Pact Learning is that you're not sitting there again. How did you say it? I hold all the knowledge. You're facilitating, which is completely different. So why don't you explain to our audience what is the difference between, let's say, a facilitator and a lecturer?
Yeah, again, great question. Again,
connecting to the internet.
Sorry about that. That's
okay.
In your Alexa app.
Well, this is the fun with the virtual technology that we're all trying to get used to, Bert.
Yeah.
So lecture is the old traditional method that we're all used to, what we used to call the sage on the stage. I have all the knowledge. I'm going to impart this knowledge to you, and you're going to write it down. What a facilitator does is takes a set of learning activities, such as the one I gave you, where they're presenting against a competitor, and they facilitate those exercises. They add to the exercise by, again, telling stories, giving examples, going deep with their expertise. And again, the major difference between somebody facilitating and lecturing is, in lecture, it's me, and it's me most of the time. A facilitator, it's more about the learners. And most of the time is spent with the learners doing something and me ensuring that activity is taking place and that the key points are being made. And that, again, I'm adding that depth of knowledge that is so critical to the learning process.
Right. Yeah, I love that. It's a different style of learning, or a different style of teaching, I'm sorry, when you are just a facilitator. And I think that this is one of the things that's missing definitely in our public schools, maybe even in our colleges and trade organizations, trade schools, because when you can engage the pupil, then their learning is through the roof. They have more fun. And really, to me, as a student, when I look back at my favorite classes, and anybody could probably have the same experience. When you look back at your favorite classes, your favorite professors, teachers, whatever you want to call it, they were the ones that made it fun and engaging. And unfortunately, that's only about 20% of the teachers out there.
Agreed. And what's funny is there's also this thing about Don't copy off your neighbor, and all these old, I'm going to slap you on the knuckles with a ruler. We want them to collaborate. Hey, what'd you put on your quiz? Here's what I put on my quiz. Really? Why did you do that? It's a completely different model nowadays. And you have really raised a very valid point. What universities, they're struggling right now. They had to go, first of all, they didn't have any time to plan for it, right? This thing happened very, very quickly. So what do you have now? You have faculty members who by definition are subject matter experts. And suddenly they're supposed to hold the attention of college-age students sitting in front of a computer lecturing all day long. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal.
Yeah. What's funny is we have a set of twins, and so they had to finish the last few weeks, couple of months of high school online. And, it was so funny because I want to say most of the time it was just them in front of a computer listening to the teacher drone on. And, of course, they're bored. So they're already on their phone and stuff like this. However, what they started doing is they started going to a friend's house, and they would all gather around either a computer here or a computer at a friend's house, because with 3 or 4 of them, it made it a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging. And so that is so critical. And bottom line is, a lot of these subject matter experts really need to humble themselves, go back and learn how to be facilitators, or at least better teachers. I mean, it just, your pupils aren't going to learn, if they're not engaged.
Yes. And I do want to make this point because it's a critical one. Subject matter experts are vital.
Yes.
And my preference would always be to have a subject matter expert facilitating whatever we design. And so for me, if you can't take the time to learn how people learn, then at least get with a group that can design it for you, which is what we do. We explain the concepts. Why are we doing this exercise this way? So they understand that. What's funny about it is facilitating is actually easier than lecturing. Because again, the impetus is on the learner, the responsibility is on the learner. I don't have to fill the entire hour by talking about stuff. It's actually much more engaging and interactive. Right.
All right. So final question I want to ask, and I kind of, I think I know the answer, but I want to ask anyway. And that is, in your opinion, how can corporate trainers teach in a way to help their students or workers retain that knowledge? It's one thing to teach, but now we have to retain it. Talk about that.
Again, it goes back to this concept of impact learning, which is problem-based. If the way you're teaching is through problem solving and collaboration, it by definition results in much higher levels of learning. Like I said, the application level. And when you can get people not to just memorize something, spit it back on a test and head back to the job, but actually apply it, it is a competitive advantage. Just like sales and marketing are competitive advantages, if the learning is done correctly, it is a competitive advantage. And a lot of corporations see it as almost as a necessary evil. It's one of the first budgets they cut. Sure. So you've got to get with this impact learning methodology, problem-based approach. The results are going to be, as I said, in a sense, a competitive advantage.
Sure. You know what? And this just popped into my head. And one of the most difficult things to teach and train on are the boring policies such as sexual harassment. And I have, I have interacted with people who, like, their idea is, we have the sexual harassment thing coming up. I hate it. It's so boring. But, to me, the more critical or the more important the subject might be, or the subject is, then really the more critical the trainer has to be, the better, I should say, the trainer has to be. It's more critical to have a great trainer, to have a great facilitator, because you want people engaged, whether they're talking about sexual harassment, or they're talking about closing better sales, or they're, talking about whatever it is that's important to your business. But bottom line is, the minute you have people tuning out, you're opening up yourself to, having your competition take you over. Maybe people making mistakes that they could avoid. So this idea of, having an engaged pupil, student, whatever you want to call them, worker, is vitally important. So I hope everybody got that from today's interview. So the book, I want to pop it up here one more time. The book is called M-Pact Learning, The New Competitive Advantage, What All Executives Need to Know. And of course, Jim, I want to pop up your .com as well. Your website is jimgilkey.com. People can go there. They can interact with you, grab the book. I'm also going to put a link to the book in the show notes. So, Jim, it's been a blast having you on the show talking about M-Pact Learning.
Bert, I can't thank you enough. And have a great day and stay safe.
All righty. Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you later.